All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Final session of the day, so you made it, and I guess we're the only thing keeping you from the party. So hopefully we can provide a little bit of interest from a different perspective. So what you just saw was really impressive and great, and talking about what an owner can do when they work well with the team. And so we're going to talk about this on a slightly smaller scale, but just to set context here for a second, do we have any owners in the room? No. Any architects, engineers, consultants, contractors? So one person made an interesting point that we come to these conferences and we maybe perhaps are all in our own echo chamber because we know what needs to be done, but maybe the people that cut the checks are not so sure. And so maybe what we should do is next year all strive to bring an owner or a client with us so they can hear kind of some of the discussions, even from the first panel this morning, that if they don't kind of ask for it and start to set that precedent, it's going to be hard for anything in the industry to change. So luckily, what this is going to discuss is a particular client that DIALOG was working with that did work with the team to kind of make sure that they had clear owner requirements. So we're going to just basically take you through this project, look at how it all started, how the team started to work based on a plan and the guidelines that were set, and then eventually what they realized as they were working that maybe they needed to change something which would lead to an improved deliverable at the end of the project. So we're going to start. Always, it's good to have a plan, understand where you think you're going and how you're going to get there. So this particular client was the University of Alberta. And so what they did was they developed a series of campus-wide BIM guidelines. In addition, they developed a BXP template to be used for specific projects. And so I think once they did that, this is kind of the first aha collaboration moment, and probably the most important, where when they started this specific project, they invited the design team to review those guidelines and see what they thought. It wasn't just something that they pushed down their throat and said, this is what you're going to do. So they knew that they wanted to kind of seek feedback. And I think this is a really important thing here. In working with the University of Alberta was DIALOG, and then we were a consultant to DIALOG.
Now we're matching.
Yeah, there we go. And so this is a quote from the client. So I'll just pause here for a second. There's not a lot of text on our slides, but I want to recognize the University of Alberta in kind of what they did. And again, the collaborative approach and the joint effort, time and time again, the teamwork to really deliver something that was great for the entire project. So one of the things they realized is that they put together what was, in essence, their first shot. So they knew that they didn't have all the answers to everything. They encouraged the project team to ask questions because they knew they didn't know anything. So they were actively seeking input from the project team. And this plan that was eventually put together, everybody agreed that it wasn't something that just was at the start and then got put on the shelf. It evolved and continued to be updated as the team came across various scenarios. So this is an example of one of the questions that the design team had for the University of Alberta around asset and facilities management. And if we look at the highlighted green section, we can actually key in on a few things. So basically, that first thing there is kind of asking, what are you going to be using this information for? Kind of what is your process? What is kind of going on? That next one there, wow, this thing is really slow, is kind of starting to get to how. What are you going to be doing with this information? So that format, how do you intend to use it and what is going to kind of happen? And I think one of the things that I'm sure everybody in this room may say is when somebody puts together a plan like this, who was involved in actually coming up and providing the input for what the owner thinks that they want or they're going to do?
And just a quick aside on that, as much as everybody, we see BIM execution plans and we know they can be the enemy of a lot of collaboration sessions, it seems. That feedback loop that was mentioned in terms of getting questions to and from both sides of the project parties was huge. So know that those plans can always be an avenue to ask those questions directly in black and white to the client.
So I'll go over a couple of basic outline of use cases that was inside of the plan. So none of these things should come as a surprise for any of you guys that have been doing this for a while. So an important one, design coordination. So starting to look at which software was being used on the project, making sure that we had scope and responsibilities outlined, and then also kind of, what are the various formats we're delivering for everything. So for example, design coordination, you're using Navisworks, or you're doing NWD, NWF. None of this should come as a surprise to everyone. This is kind of standard par for the case. But what the team did start to do is start to try to dictate how they were going to use information. So this was a model-driven project, so they really wanted to make sure that the schedules that they were using were being extracted, the schedules were being populated with information from the model. Why would you want to do that? I know if I make a change to geometry, that the schedule is going to automatically update. I have that kind of consistency. However, I'm going to go back on the fact that everything came from the model here and hit reality. So how many of you work with probably a senior person that has some form of an Excel spreadsheet that they've been using for the past 25 years that has enough macros in it to crash servers and everything like that, and that's the only thing they're going to use? Anybody? Yeah, there you exist. And so the reality is that it may be hard to change those person's behavior, but that information is really important. So the team did use Ideate BIMLink to get the information from those schedules into the model, but more importantly into dRofus, which kind of served as a central source of truth. So while we would all like to say that everything is driven and happens in the Revit model, that's just not the reality, and that's something that we need to recognize and make sure that we have a mechanism for getting that information, which is important, into an environment that everybody can interact with. So room data sheets. This is another thing that was on there. And again, the team had questions for the University of Alberta. Are there specific things that you're really interested in that we should be focusing on? How is the role of that room data sheet going to evolve over the course of the project? And that is something that kind of did happen. Room data sheets, for those of you that are familiar with working on these, are really helpful at the start of a project, especially when you're meeting with stakeholders to kind of outline requirements and everything like that. But as the project evolved, information changed, the team realized that room data sheets as a mechanism to deliver that information wasn't the best way to do it. So they shifted away from that, and there's some other things that will show how they kind of conveyed that information. But what's important to note is that even though they didn't use room data sheets as that delivery method, they didn't stop using data. So that's really key. So I've set a little bit of a framework. We have kind of the guidelines that we're operating within. So let's start to talk about how the team thought that they were going to achieve what they had, and remembering that whenever you have a plan, don't forget that sometimes you may need to revisit it. So I'll give you a little bit of a quick roadmap of the tools used on this. Way not as complicated as the example that we just saw, but in terms of kind of the information that was coming in, a lot of Excel and Revit. This was all pushed into dRofus. So dRofus kind of served as a central source of truth. It's a kind of a database management platform. And so there's bi-directional functionality to be able to get information from Revit into dRofus and back into Revit, as well as the ability to ingest information from Excel. Another thing that the team used, and I'll put it on here because this was really important in terms of coordination and reviews, is that there were the room data sheets and there were drawings. What did people use Bluebeam for? To comment. In essence, that information was really either then put back into Revit as either correcting and moving or shifting a wall or making a change to the room data sheet. So Bluebeam did play a huge part of the process as well. And again, that information indirectly was either into Revit or to dRofus. At the end, the team thought that the tool that would bring everything together would be Revisto. Now, in terms of what that team was familiar and comfortable with, going to Revisto represented a huge process shift. And so the team decided ultimately that that was not the way to go, and they went with Matterport. And we'll get to how the team used Matterport later. Is everybody in here familiar with Matterport? Kind of know what it is? So we'll talk about that. And so the team was ultimately faced with the fact that they have to collect all of this data, and they wanted to do it in a repeatable fashion. Now, at the same time, DIALOG was pursuing another project at the University of Alberta. So in terms of the deliverable of information at the end to a client, they wanted to do something that they could replicate as part of their kind of thought of getting this next project, is that we have a repeatable process that we can do. So ultimately what the team decided was that they were going to use the COBie schema to deliver information. Is everybody in here familiar enough with COBie? Yeah? Okay, so everybody knows scheme for structured data, really great for enabling downstream use. And within this process, how many people have had to compile the spreadsheets to represent the COBie schema for a project? Did you enjoy it? I sensed a little bit of sarcasm. So one of the things that the team did was start to use tools like dRofus to try to help with that process. And so what you're seeing here is a dRofus properties pane within Revit, where information that is starting to be used to create the information for a COBie deliverable is being pieced together from the various parameters and then get concatenated and everything like that. So trying as best to use tools so that they didn't have to do that post-processing. So one of the things we need to realize, though, is that COBie is great, but we need to reflect. If we don't properly define what we're going to be doing, we can have a problem. So remember this slide here where the team was asking these questions. They really wanted to understand, well, why would COBie be something that the owner would want? So there's a picture there up on the screen. Can anybody tell me why an owner perhaps would want COBie schema information for what you see in that picture? Maintenance? Asset tracking? Yeah. So what you're seeing there inside of a mechanical room is a bunch of assets that can need to be maintained or they can be replaced. So it makes sense to have information about maybe perhaps an ID for that piece of equipment, knowing when something was installed, knowing what systems it's connected to. I think we had some information, some of the discussions earlier this morning, the patient on the table and something being disconnected and not realizing that that's actually impacting an OR room that's being used, right? So it makes sense to have the COBie information for this. What about that? A series of concrete beams. If you have to replace concrete beams in a building, I'm not really sure that COBie is going to help you, and you probably have bigger problems, right? So when we have owners that are saying, just give me everything for COBie, what does that really mean? It starts to become a mindless exercise for the team because they're gathering information that is not fit for purpose and they're going to use. But our owners may not know this, so this is something that we have to kind of explain to them. Have we had people in here that are, I think the gentleman in the back, when you did your COBie deliverable, did you give everything, or did they have specific purposes and reasons why, or? It changed, yeah. So
we'll get to the same.
This is something that, again, we need to talk to our clients and help them understand. So one of the reasons, one of the methods that we can do this is to make sure that we're asking the right questions and having the right people in the room to make sure those decisions are being made. Because everybody on a project has a different perspective. So if you're a design and construction manager, your focus is on project completion. So what are some of the things that a design or construction manager may be interested in terms of information? Anybody hazard a guess? Scope, right? So they want to make sure that they have a program on time and on budget. So things like the room name, the number, and the area. If you're a facilities manager, you're really concerned with operate and maintain. So what kind of information would you be interested in? Energy, yeah. But in terms of properties, we talked about earlier, equipment ID. I need to be able to identify something specific. And I may want to know about installation dates, right? So that's a completely different approach because of what they have to do. Some would probably argue these people are the most important, so they should kind of come first. But there's even other players involved, right? So, you spend a lot of money on a building, maybe a really nice $10,000 reception desk. You want to make sure to keep it clean. More importantly, you want to know what you have to use to do that and what you shouldn't use, right? And so again, from a COBie schema perspective, we don't really talk about the supporting documents a lot, but understanding and having that information. So all these people have a different perspective, but all this information is relevant and important in terms of handing over to the owner at the end. So in terms of collecting that information, we always want to make sure that we're asking the right questions. Hopefully that's coming as a collaborative effort between the design team, the contractor, and the owner, especially when it gets to defining what those requirements are going to be. We're making sure we're asking the right questions and the right people are in the room. So we've set the stage now. Let's start talking about the specific project and what the actual team did. So just a little bit about the project. This was at the University of Alberta, that Edmonton campus. Originally, the building was built in 1963 for the Faculty of Engineering, and you can see a little bit of the stats on the project here. You have something on this as well?
Yeah, and we at DIALOG have been actually very lucky to both have quite a few of our team members coming from this exact quad that you see there, and being able to touch most corners of the engineering faculty buildings to this date. So it's been a huge source of pride, kind of the legacy that we have with the faculty, and we really wanted this project to be a showpiece for them.
So when the team started off, again, this is being an existing project, there was a lot of information that was already present. So they had existing drawings, they had scans, so they made sure they scanned the building, and they had CAD files for the campus, all right? So this is kind of some of the information they had at the start. And one of the things that we're really great at in this industry is siloing information. So, all that information is really great and everything, but right now it's just not connected. And so just an example here of one of the point cloud scans, and again, being an existing building, really important to make sure where everything is properly geolocated. So the team made sure that they did that, so you can see the coordinates of this here. Now, as the team started to work, they started to produce the information for the database, in this case for dRofus. They started to produce a bunch of Revit models, and after post-occupancy, the building was scanned again. This is kind of where Matterport comes in. And again, each of these initially were in their own silos, but really what we want to start to achieve is that interconnectivity so that we can rely on that information and so that dRofus is connected to those Revit models. We're having the ability to look at that Matterport scan and then start to get information maybe from dRofus and or from the model in there as well. So this is kind of our ultimate goal, to get away from the silo and have everything work together. So just a little bit more about dRofus. Again, we are a planning and data management software collecting requirements. So this is a picture of our web viewer here, and this is basically the functional program for the lab that you're seeing. So a series of the rooms that are in the building. I can look at a particular room, look at the various properties that are inside of that room, and start to ascertain different types of information. Again, here, seeing some of that COBie information. I can go even further and start to interrogate what exactly is in the room. So in this case, that fire alarm pull, and start to look at that data on an instance or an occurrence level. And again, pulling some of that COBie information. We then had 5 different disciplines doing Revit. So architecture, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, landscape, structural. And what's most important here, you guys are all familiar with Revit, but again, starting to kind of pull the dots, using dRofus, being able to tie requirements. So looking at this particular room, and you can see that there's in the bottom right corner, a little graph there, you'll see that there's a dRofus side column and a Revit column. The dRofus represents requirements that were preset for that room, in this case, the cabinets. We can tie Revit families to items inside of dRofus so that we can then understand, when I click on a room, this needs to have 3 pieces of that casework, and in this case, we have an exact match, so we know that everything has been put in there. We can do that same thing in terms of being able to track area, where we say that a room is supposed to be 10 square meters, but when we actually look at the information that's coming from Revit, it's 12 square meters, so we have an issue there. So again, starting to make that thread of data that gets connected. And then this is one of the Matterport scans, and this is previous, if I remember correctly, before the renovation started, but again, understanding where everything was located.
There was a pre-designed scan, so it ended up coming in handy for cases that we'll get into in a couple of slides as the visual guide for the project team.
Okay, so again, our ultimate goal, we're trying to connect this information, but ultimately we need to turn something over to the owner. And again, the team thought that they were going to use the COBie schema to deliver information. However, along the way, as the team started to work, COVID happened. So the team was actively meeting during design, doing things such as design reviews, rolling up their sleeves, getting around the table, trying to figure out information. But with COVID, obviously, that all stopped. There was no more in-person gathering. Teams still needed to coordinate. And there was 3 main actions during all their meetings that they were trying to do. So as I mentioned at the start, there was a lot of information to visualize. So in addition to the scans and all the Revit models and all the existing documentation, trying to figure out how to put all that together and understand and work that. There was all of the information. So each of those presets of the models and everything like that had data points that the team needed to try to understand. And then, again, marking up. I talked earlier about Bluebeam and the ability to use that to do reviews and everything. The team needed to measure and mark up. And what the team started to realize is that I showed this map earlier, and everything is working great. We're trying to get all these connections and everything. But ultimately, they kind of started to have software fatigue. So we got to remember a couple of things here. The team was working from home, okay? So a lot of these programs rely on internet connectivity. And if we're having that and we're all working from home and not necessarily having the greatest connections, it can cause a problem. There's multiple passwords and logins to remember to get into all these kind of various systems. And then just also to making sure everybody's up to date with the procedures and processes for using all these tools. So that started to pose a problem. The team then thought to themselves, well, if we're having this issue and at the end we're going to turn over information to the owner, is there the potential that maybe the same thing will happen to them? And if we talk and think about handing over information at the end of the project, if we give the owner a COBie deliverable, are they really going to be able to use it? Are they really going to be able to maximize its use? And so if we know our audience, we know that most facilities and maintenance people are pretty hands-on. They have the tools of the trade that they're using, and they're just used to doing things the way they do. They're not necessarily opposed to using new technology, but it might be kind of hard to teach them. I remember one of my first projects where we were going to hand over Revit as a deliverable. I was so excited, and we're talking to the facilities guy and showing him the model and how he can click on something and see all this information and how it was tied to the schedules. And he looked at me and was like, that's cool, and then asked me if at the end of the project we were going to give him CAD plans. Because that was kind of the world that he operated in. That was a role that he was familiar with. I also don't know how many times has anybody been asked by a client to provide Revit models, and then you ask them if they have any Revit licenses, and they tell you no. Does that ever happen to anybody in this room? So again, it's like you're asking me for information that you can't even open, and I don't think you know how much it will cost for you to open it if that's really what you want. Not to mention, is it that you just want to see because there's other ways to see, or do you intend to edit, which then gets into, do you actually need to use Revit, or can we give you something else? So these are some of the things that we have to do and deal with. So at this point, this is where the team decided that maybe that COBie schema that they were thinking of handing over to the client wasn't necessarily the best way to allow the client to maximize and understand all the information associated with the project. So they made a pivot. COBie initially was what the team thought, but maybe again, this is not the best thing that they could do. And so wouldn't it be better if the team provided the client something that they could interact with, something that they could visualize, and then also be able to understand the data and the additional documentation and everything that happened with it. Because while the COBie would have given them the data, all of that visual aspect, which is extremely important, would have somewhat been lost. And so this is where we get to what the team and what we decided to do, where you'll see here, this is a link inside of Matterport, which is then going to the dRofus web, where people can start to interrogate further information about the project if they so choose. And so we'll go over this a little bit more. So this is just an example here too, also to the point of, with Matterport, if they wanted to do measurements or everything like that and interact with it, Matterport allowed them to do this as well.
Okay, so again, this is going back to the collaborative effort, like the data suite that we looked at pulling together and what was going to be our central hub. This is a shot early on. We talked about that there was a Revisto pilot for the project in the early phase. We ended up not following through with that at the time. That has changed in DIALOG greatly, but it was a valuable piece of data to make sure that we had everything together geolocated, as mentioned earlier. Another example here of how we brought all that data together in the working software within Revit. You see our multidiscipline models here. We've got all the engineering disciplines, the architecture. We were working on the site grading with the existing topo that we got from our civil firm, which was WSP. All brought in also with the existing Matterport scan. You see there is that validation of the shell of the building. And here's how the hub came together as the design progressed towards, the bid phase and towards actually, getting things to look at more of that life cycle approach. So you've got this 3-part hub of the Revit authoring software there on the left-hand side with the dRofus data shown. You've got the Matterport viewer. It's actually the as-built space you can see there on the bottom right. And then the dRofus app you can see up there on the top right, where depending on the use of the data, depending on people's comfort of where they wanted to enter it, you've got those options of portals to interrogate the building, as Joel mentioned. Okay, so here we are within an architectural model within Revit. You can see we're navigating into are we? Yes. So we're in the architectural model within Revit, and we navigate down into one of the rooms in the building, the focus of the architectural model. We bring up our dRofus properties, which work right in tandem with the out-of-the-box Revit properties. We see how we're synced with the database here, looking at room name and room number. We drill down into the items of the room. We can dig into the items that are within the space. Yes, it's a bunch of generic cubes. Don't laugh. That is the info the owner needed to see, was basically the volume and the nomenclature. But there's cases where you need more info than that. As we showed earlier, we're getting into a mechanical room now in our mech model. And you need to have, greater interrogation of the data there and greater knowledge of the space. So we're actually working with like Armstrong heat exchanger families, keeping their Kobe data intact. And then if you need to access the data on the web, you have it there as well. You've got that portal where you don't need the authoring software. The equivalent data is there right within the web viewer. You drill down into the documents of the room. You need to look at a shop drawing. It's there for you. But this was the segue for the ownership team. This is where they felt most comfortable first interrogating the building was through the Matterport web viewer. And we can navigate into the room that's there that we showed within the ARC model. And you can see just getting right into the tag embedded in the viewer takes you right back to that dRofus web link. So you're now within the room. You see the parent properties of the space. Drill down into the items in the room. You've got the campus nomenclature, like their most important data. Get down into the items, into the documents. It's like, okay, I need the shop drawing package for that. Get into there, go download, and there it is. So for knowing the audience being that critical point that we keep trying to put across, that was crucial for that workflow.
And at that point, when the project was complete, by default, what was initially in Revit models is now built, so it's picked up in the Matterport scan. And so really it's a measure of all that other information, just being able to provide those links to be able to get to it in a way that is convenient and just kind of cuts down on the noise that the owner has to walk through.
Exactly, and web-based. And so again, that software fatigue gets mitigated by that. Okay, so the mapping, and this is a key to success is mapping of everything, mapping of processes, mapping of assets, mapping of the actual campus itself as we talk about our geolocation. It's important to have that as the core of each facet of the team as they're working together, is making sure that everything is mapped out, all the way going back to the questions asked of the client.
So if you just think about that and we expand and we take the component of a room, right? That room has an ID in dRofus, which then allows it to be connected to a room in Revit, and that ID is maintained. That ID is present when we use Excel to import information, like for example, what equipment is going into a particular room. Mm-hmm. And that ID is also then used to make that connection to Matterport in terms of the hyperlink. So, that's from a data perspective, having that mapping. And then as Neil mentioned, from a geometry perspective, that geolocation and the alignment of coordinate systems so that everything is coming in the same place.
And many, many parameters involved. And knowing how people want to interact with those, how they want to input them, having that adaptability of the data is huge. It's like, what is the source of each of that team member wanting to access, edit, and change those parameters? And that clear intention. Just, coming back to what is it all about? What is actually needed? To the quote there earlier of like, give me what I need, not what I ask for, is the huge, the crux of what we went to with this project.
And again, from the perspective of the University of Alberta, to ask those questions, to understand that they didn't have all the answers, to encourage the design team to come up with questions, to understand that, yes, we were going towards a COBie deliverable, but then actually realizing, what? We can do better than this. We can do something and provide something that's more useful, and ultimately that the owner is not only likely to benefit from, but also more likely to use.
Mm-hmm. And here we have like the team getting together in the finished space and actually seeing the fruits of the labor come together. And so we have this beautiful new space for the students and the faculty to use. And we've got a few slides here of that finished visual. You can see all those systems working in tandem. It's a very niche project. That strong wall that you see at the base of the photo comes in later. The facade, it's a much more inviting space now for folks walking through the engineering quad, way more so than it had been in the past, with that kind of edifice feel of the original 60s build. And new ways of access. This is the expanded wing on the east side of the building, new ways of getting material in and out, just that much greater access to daylight within the space was key in the design. And it's nothing without a good team. Being a technologist myself, we don't often see ourselves in these presentations, and we had an amazing technologist team across all our design disciplines that helped put this project together, all the way through to doing the as-built content with our CA team and getting those documents in place in the database. From A to Z, it was an amazing team that I was happy to work with. And this is a bit about the as-built space. This was earlier this year. We actually got to dedicate that strong wall to one of our partner emeritus within the firm, Dr. Jim Montgomery. We had a metal sculpture added to the side of the wall. You can see in the right-hand photo of the Walterdale Bridge, another DIALOG project in Edmonton that we're very proud of. And you can see that decorative plaque there at the base honoring Dr. Jim and all the contributions he had made to the engineering faculty. So a very cool postscript to the as-built of the lab. And our next steps. Here is our legend, our champion of these workflows in DIALOG. Anna Elsunki is our dRofus champion across all its workflows. We've had several healthcare and institutional projects and pursuits now being database enabled, and just improved deliverables across the board. And this was just one workflow that we see that we had looked at for the course of what this client needed. And there are several more there, from everything from functional programming, as mentioned, room data sheets, QA, QC. This is very much a boon for helping us align with what are becoming more and more strict QA, QC mandates for clients, maintainable asset lists that come from the client, from equipment providers, getting that data in place. And when it comes to it, COBie spreadsheets can still be a deliverable, can still be a mandate, and we have that building blocks of data there for that.
Yeah. And just to note too that the design team did actually hand over a COBie deliverable, but was for information only because the client was more interested in using the hub. So
yeah, and so it all speaks to that adaptability, making sure that everything is on hand for those pivots that can happen.
Yeah. The QR code in the top right, actually a couple of months ago, the Faculty of Engineering at University of Alberta released a cool video of the lab. So they do really cool things in there in terms of concrete testing, and they have a cameras, high-speed velocity cameras to look at impact and everything. So feel free to take a look at that to just kind of see what's going on in the lab. It's some pretty cool stuff.
And thanks very much for your time, and looking forward to some good questions.
Thank you. All right, I've got the mic here. I'm ready to go. If we got some questions, anybody?
Thank you for staying.
Yes.
I don't want to hog the mic, so please put your hands up as well. I definitely agree. Owner education seems to be a common theme throughout today. So kind of like bring your kids to work day, we need to bring a client to conference day. Just a short anecdote, like even last week, I got an RFP, came with an LOD matrix. They said, review it. We have gym equipment at LOD 350. I'm like, why would you need that for 350? Then I look at the project, it doesn't even have a gym. So, we go back to the client and they say, oh, great feedback, make us an LOD matrix, make us a BXB. We haven't even been awarded the project yet. So first of all, can you relate to that kind of push and pull at the RFP stage? And also, were you already awarded the project when the University of Alberta asked you for this input?
In this particular case, the award had happened when there was the first look at, like Joel mentioned it, in tandem, we had the campus guidelines for BIM as well as the BXB for the project. And so it was that, it was then that funnel, like we were able to have that direct audience, all the parties in the room, everybody from the faculty side to come in, and it gave us a bit of ease with that feedback loop to, being able to directly engage and get all the heads around a table up until COVID hit, which then of course the early building blocks we had put together gave us a leg up for being able to still collaborate fruitfully remotely. So we do still see the same, what you're talking about. I had the same thing with an RFP that came across my desk this week about something that you really want to ask the question of, do you actually need what you're asking for? So we look forward to those question loops, and we don't get those proactive conversations enough with the owners, like outside of a project RFP. So we're hoping to move the needle, but we know it's a slow and steady process.
Well, one thing I'll add too, though, is that somebody mentioned it earlier that for things to happen, people like to copy. So how many people in here are familiar with the Penn State BIM execution plan, which was probably one of the start? And if you go and look at most owners' BIM execution plans, some of them even forget to take out the Penn State references. So one owner was like, oh, this is the one we should use, and everybody started doing it, right? And so we've seen that time and time again. So if we hopefully can have these conversations with enough owners, and again, really understand you're asking your design team to do things that is taking away from them doing trying to design better, and we didn't even talk about the design side and do a better product, but it's just mind-numbing, wasteful exercise that's not going to benefit you. And if you can rather divert your attention to more important things, it's going to help you at the end. And it's kind of really pointing that out to them, and it's easier with some than others. And the larger the project is and the more jurisdictions get involved, it can be hard. But ultimately, to the point of why are we doing all of this, that's just something that we have to help them see.
Roberto from Parmelo. First of all, thank you for showing us the integration and the value that is bringing to the project. On a similar note, talking about how we can improve that planning and requirements definition with the clients. Is it possible right now with dRofus to use it as a requirements and planning tool? And if we can have a reference in mind, there are platforms like Plannerly, that can be used for helping defining the information requirement delivery matrix. Can we use dRofus for planning the requirements and then also to validate? If not, is that in the roadmap for the platform?
So I don't want to turn this, if you didn't figure it out, I work for dRofus. I don't want to turn this into a dRofus ad so I can catch up with you. But what I can say is that generally we are a requirements software. What your definition of a requirement is and how you want to manage that is going to depend, but we can put something in there. And then when it comes to a check, if I say that this conference room here needs gray carpet, and somebody sees gray carpet and checks a yes, no box, and again, whether you consider that validation or not, maybe not, but we can do that. So I guess it depends on your scope, but happy to catch up with you and talk more about that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, going once, going twice. All right, we'll wrap it up. All right, thank you, gentlemen. Let's give one more round of applause for you guys. Thank you.